This is good. This is good.
It's good, okay. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopijana Vallabha Girivardhari. Gopijana Vallabha Girivardhari. Yashodanandana Pradajana Ranjana. Yashodanandana Pradajana Ranjana. Yamuna Tiravanachari. Yamuna Tiravanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Parudikacharya Ashtotar the Shri Srimad Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. ISKCON BBT Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Parudikacharya Ashtotar the Shri Srimad Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnavin Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Srimad Bhagavad Gita Ki Jai. Samaveda Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glory to the assembled devotees. All glory to the assembled devotees. All glory to Sri Guru and Gauranga. So I think this is a little high. I'm worried about Vijay up here. Okay. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. On the 17th day of August, 2021 in San Diego, we're reading from Srimad Bhagavad Gita as it is, translation and commentary by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Beginning chapter 14, the three modes of material nature, page 567. Shri Bhagavan Vacha Padam Bhuya Pravakshyami Jnananam Jnanamuttamam Yajnatva Munayak Sarve Param Siddhim Itogataha. Shri Bhagavan Vacha Padam Bhuyak Pravakshyami Jnananam Jnanamuttamam Yajnatva Munayak Sarve Padam Siddhimito Gataha. Shri Bhagavan Vacha Padam Bhuyak Pravakshyami Jnananam Jnanamuttamam Yajnatva Munayak Sarve Padam Siddhimito Gataha. Shri Bhagavan Vacha Padam bhuyak pravakshyami Jnananam jnanamuttamam Yadgatva munayak sarve Padam siddhimato gataha. Good, Dhamarash. Shri Bhagavan Vacha Padam bhuyak pravakshyami Jnananam jnanamuttamam Yadgatva munayak sarve Padam siddhimato gataha. Shri Bhagavan Vacha Padam bhuyak pravakshyami Jnananam jnanamuttamam Yadgatva munayak sarve Padam siddhimato gataha. Shri Bhagavan Vacha Padam bhuyak pravakshyami Jnananam jnanamuttamam Yadgatva munayak sarve Padam siddhimato gataha. Shri Bhagavan Vacha Padam bhuyak pravakshyami Jnananam jnanamuttamam Yadgatva munayak sarve Padam siddhimato. All right, I'll read the synonyms. Shri Bhagavan Vacha, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, said, Padam, transcendental, Bhuyaha, again, Pravakshyami, I shall speak. Jnananam, of all knowledge, Jnanam, knowledge, Uttamam, the Supreme. Yat, which, Gyatva, knowing, Munyaha, the sages, Sarve, all, Param, transcendental, Siddhim, perfection, Itaha, from this world, Gataha, attained. Translation. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, Again I shall declare to you the supreme wisdom, the best of all knowledge, knowing which all the sages have attained the supreme perfection. Purport. From the 7th chapter to the end of the 12th chapter, Sri Krishna in detail reveals the absolute truth, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Now, the Lord himself is further enlightening Arjuna. If one understands this chapter through the process of philosophical speculation, he will come to an understanding of devotional service. In the 13th chapter, it was clearly explained that by humbly developing knowledge, one may possibly be freed from material entanglement. It has also been explained that it is due to association with the modes of nature that the living entity is entangled in this material world. Now, in this chapter, the Supreme Personality explains what those modes of nature are, how they act, how they bind, and how they give liberation. The knowledge explained in this chapter is proclaimed by the Supreme Lord to be superior to the knowledge given so far in other chapters. By understanding this knowledge, various great sages attained perfection and transferred to the spiritual world. The Lord now explains the same knowledge in a better way. This knowledge is far, far superior to all other processes of knowledge thus far explained, and knowing this, many attain perfection. Thus it is expected that one who understands this 14th chapter will attain perfection. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilatam Mena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I was born in the darkest of ignorance, but my spiritual master Srila Prabhupada opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. I offer my humble obeisance unto him and all members of Sri Parampara. So, you may recall, because Krishna is saying that again, the second word here is bhuya, again. So what has he spoken before in this regard of the three modes of nature? Well, we can remember in the 7th chapter, which Prabhupada refers to in the purport, Daiviyesha gunamayi mamaya duratya mamevi epapadyane mayame tangtanantine. You know this one, huh? That this material energy of mind, which is divine, because it's mind, Daiviyesha, is composed of the three modes of material nature, gunamayi. And he says, duratya, very difficult to overcome. In fact, it's impossible on one's own. But for those who surrender unto me, they easily cross beyond it. So that's one place where the modes of nature have come up. Second chapter, Trigunya Vishaya Veda, Nistrigunya Bhavarjana. The gunas, he says, for the most part, now this may be surprising, for the most part, the Vedas deal with the three modes of material nature. There's a whole bunch of Vedic knowledge dealing with different kinds of sacrifices to reach heavenly planets. There is something called Ayurveda, which deals with medicine, which is also within the three modes of nature, maybe the mode of goodness, but still a mode, it's not transcendental knowledge. Dhanurveda. So there's a lot of Vedic knowledge that is mundane, but it helps one keep in the mode of goodness and do things in the proper way, dharmic way, so that you at least keep getting human forms of life, so you come in touch with the devotee and get the clue to devotional service. So the modes of nature have been discussed in previous chapters. But here they're going to be really explained, how these modes work. There's one sentence here that has been revised. It says, now in this chapter, at the bottom of 567, now in this chapter, the Supreme Personality explains what those modes of nature are, how they act, how they bind, and how one can get transcendental freedom from them. That comes at the end of the chapter, very important verse. So, and what a inducement to read the chapter. And anyone who wants this chapter achieves perfection. So we should probably continue studying it. Let's go on. Text 2. A question? Idam jnanam upashritya mama sadharm yamagataha sargepi nopajayanti pralayena vitanticha. By becoming fixed in this knowledge, one can attain to the transcendental nature like my own. Thus established, one is not born at the time of creation or disturbed at the time of dissolution. Purport. After acquiring perfect transcendental knowledge, one acquires qualitative equality with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, becoming free from the repetition of birth and death. One does not, however, lose his identity as an individual soul. It is understood from Vedic literature that the liberated souls who have reached the transcendental planets of the spiritual sky always look to the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord, being engaged in his transcendental loving service. So even after liberation, the devotees do not lose their individual identities. Generally, in the material world, whatever knowledge we get is contaminated by the three modes of material nature. Knowledge which is not contaminated by the three modes of nature is called transcendental knowledge. As soon as one is situated in that transcendental knowledge, he is on the same platform as the Supreme Person. Those who have no knowledge of the spiritual sky hold that after being freed from the material activities of the material form, this spiritual identity becomes formless without any variegatedness. However, just as there is material variegatedness in this world, in the spiritual world there is also variegatedness. Those in ignorance of this think that spiritual existence is opposed to material variety. But actually, in the spiritual sky, one attains a spiritual form. There are spiritual activities, and the spiritual situation is called devotional life. That atmosphere is said to be uncontaminated, and there one is equal in quality with the Supreme Lord. To obtain such knowledge, one must develop all these spiritual qualities. One who thus develops the spiritual qualities is not affected either by the creation or by the destruction of the material world. So, Krishna consciousness can be thought of as a process of purification. These modes of nature are what the material world works in, these different modes of nature, and how we can understand the symptoms of them. It will be described in this chapter. For instance, we've all had experience. We may have also been like this at one time, really into the enjoying mood, really into accumulating some money so we can enjoy even more, and that's the mode of passion, conducted by kama, by lust mostly, and greed also is part of that. Lust kind of devolves into greed. Mode of ignorance, we'll find, is we've experienced this ourselves, sometimes laziness, you don't want to do anything, depression, tendency toward intoxication, procrastination, sleeping too much. This is what mode of ignorance is. Now the mode of goodness, which is kind of a stepping stone to transcendental knowledge, is characterized by peacefulness, cleanliness, interest in transcendental matters, the self-control, these type of things. And so in the process of devotional service, much of the rules and regulations we'll find, like ashram life, is to bring us up to the mode of goodness and keep us there, so that we'll be more receptive to the transcendental message. So in one verse, some of you may be familiar with this verse. If you read the Krishna book, this is the beginning of the introduction, I believe, or maybe even the preface. And Prabhupada quotes this verse. How many verses has he quoted in the Krishna book? And maybe the only one or two. But this verse he quotes, and this is spoken by Pariksit at the beginning of his the 10th canto. Finally, after all, can you imagine? Like, it must be at least 5 days now. He's just been sitting and listening and not eating, not drinking, not sleeping. So now he's very eager to hear the Summum Bonum, which is the 10th canto, Krishna's pastimes in Vrindavan and Mathura and Dwarka. So he says this: Nivrittatar Shai Rupagi Yamanan Babausadat Shrota Mano Viramat Kauttama Shloka Gunana Bharat Puman Vadajay Divina Pashugnat. Now there he's saying that Nivritta Tarsha, those who are free from material desires and passions. Tarsha comes from the word Trishna, which means thirst. All our senses in the material consciousness are thirsty for gratification. That's the thirst. So one who is free of that is called Nivritta Tarsha, pure devotees. Ubhagiyamana, when they sing and they utter and they describe Krishna Katha, talks about Krishna. Bhavaushada Shrota Mano Viraman. It acts like a medicine to cure the disease of birth and death. And it's not a bitter medicine, it's very delightful for the ear and for the heart. So then he says, who then would not listen to it? Who then would not drink in this nectar of Krishna Katha? Ka Uttama Shloka Gunanavada. Now Uttama Shloka is a name for Krishna. You know what it means. You may know what it means. Do you know it? Who else knows what Uttama Shloka means? You know what Shloka means. Verses. Haribol. Let's see if you have. They left the whole half the temple open for you. You can see it. They knew you would come. Anyone? You know what a shloka is? What's an Uttama shloka? Yes, the supreme shlokas. So it's he who is glorified in the best of shlokas, the best of poems. It's a name for Krishna, actually. Gunanuvadat, words that describe his qualities of Uttama shloka. Who then would not listen to Puman Virajeta? Viraja means to give up. Who would not give it up except a Pashugna? You know what a Pashugna is? Pashugna means a killer of animals. Those who are meat eaters, generally that mode of passion, mode of ignorance, very prominent, and it keeps one unreceptive to the message. So we want to, of course, follow the four regular principles: no meat eating, etc., and stay in the mode of goodness. So we'll be very receptive to the transcendental sound, beginning with the holy name and the message of the Bhagavad Gita. And we absorb this knowledge, and then we can become fixed in the mode of goodness and pure goodness, and we'll be well on our way back to Godhead. We are on page 568? Okay, you got it. Okay. Okay, so we did 2, so let's do 3, unless there's any questions. Now this third one is...
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Haribol. Go ahead, Dhanabai.
Haribol. Hare Krishna. Thank you. I have a quick question. In the first sloka, it says in purport, the 4th line, it says the process of, it says if one understands this chapter through the process of philosophical speculation.
Yes.
Then it will understand. So I thought speculation is not good, right?
No, that's not right. Because there's mental speculation and there's philosophical speculation. This comes from living for a while in ISKCON, where Prabhupada differentiated the two. Mental speculation we definitely don't want to do. That's trying to rely on our own ideas and our own senses, and we can never really come to the absolute truth that way. But philosophical speculation, in Prabhupada's lexicon, as to say this is what he meant by it, is hearing the Shastra and thinking about it, coming up with questions, inquiring from the right source for the answers. That's what philosophical speculation is. What we're doing right now. Applying your mind, your intelligence to what you read. Taking notes, and for later discussion and questions and inquiry. That's philosophical speculation.
Okay.
And we're meant to do that. All right,
Thank you so
this
much.
third verse is a really important verse because Krishna is saying that I'm the father of all. So we're all God's children. Mama yone mahad brahma tasmad garbam dadamyaham sambhavak sarva bhutanam tato bhavati bharata. Sorry, I was thinking of the next verse, but this verse also refers to the same subject. The total material substance called Brahman is the source of birth, and it is that Brahman that I impregnate, making possible the births of all living beings, O son of Bharata. Now, just a little bit about the language Prabhupada uses, because you won't get this anywhere else. There's a phrase Prabhupada uses sometimes, O scion of Bharat. You remember reading that? S-C-I-O-N. So when he says, O son of Bharat, he means the same thing. He's not literally a son of Bharat, he's a descendant of Bharat. And that's very exalted, but I think it's the same Bharat we're going to be reading about in the next couple of chapters of the 5th canto, after we read about Rishabdev. Okay, scion of Bharat. Purport, this is an explanation of the world. Everything that takes place is due to the combination of Chaitra and Chaitragya, the body and the spirit soul. That, of course, is an echo from the 13th chapter. This combination of material nature and the living entity is made possible by the Supreme God Himself. The Mahatattva is the total cause of the total cosmic manifestation, and that total substance of the material cause, in which there are 3 modes of nature, is sometimes called Brahman. The Supreme Personality impregnates that total substance, and thus innumerable universes become possible. This total material substance, the Mahatattva, is described as Brahman in the Vedic literature, Mundak Upanishad 119. Tasmad etad Brahma nama rupam annam chajayate. The Supreme Person impregnates that Brahman with the seeds of the living entities. The 24 elements, beginning from earth, water, fire, and air, are all material energy, and they constitute what is called the Mahad Brahma, or the great Brahman, the material nature. As explained in the 7th chapter, beyond this there is another superior nature, the living entity. In material nature, the superior nature is mixed by the will of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and thereafter all living entities are born of this material nature. The scorpion lays its eggs in piles of rice, and sometimes it is said that the scorpion is born out of rice. But the rice is not the cause of the scorpion. Actually, the eggs were laid by the mother. Similarly, material nature is not the cause of the birth of the living entities. The seed is given by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and they only seem to come out as products of material nature. They, the living entities. Thus, every living entity, according to his past activities, has a different body created by this material nature, so that the entity can enjoy or suffer according to his past deeds. The Lord is the cause of all the manifestations of living entities in the material world. So this is when he says, I impregnate. You may recall this way in which Krishna expands as Lord Balaram. Balaram expands as Sankarshan, and what's the first chapter of Vyuha, then it's the second chapter of Vyuha. This is Vasudev, Sankarshan, Pradyumna, Aniruddha. And then from the second Sankarshan expands Mahavishnu, who has been lying in the corner there since I've been here, and emanating uncounted universes from his breathing and from the pores of his body. They're like in seed form. Then they expand. Then he further expands as Garbhodakashai Vishnu. Now, who knows what Garbhodakashai means other than you? Do you remember what it means? Yes, Prakash. Now, Garbha is not womb. Garbha is fetus. And Udaka? Udaka is the ocean. You have 3 oceans. Karanodakashai, Garbhodakashai, Chirodakashai. So there's an ocean created by the second Vishnu, because he had nowhere to lie. So from his body, all the perspiration filled up half the universe, and he's lying there on Sheshanag as a bed, you know. And then from his navel grows this lotus, and in the stem of the lotus are all the planets and everything, and all the karma. And on top of that lotus, who appears? Brahma. Lord Brahma. Actually, Brahma. You have to watch out for your long A's, because they're talking about Brahman, right? What does this say? It's called Brahma, and then you have Brahman. So Brahman is one name for the total material energy. It's also a name for the vast first stage of realization of the absolute truth, Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. So it means the great. In this case, the great conglomeration of all the material elements is Brahman, the raw materials for the universe. So then, Garbhodakasha Vishnu further expands as Chirodakasha Vishnu. Now he's lying on an ocean of Kira. We know what Kira is. Milk, or condensed milk. On the planet called Svetadvip or Dhruva Loka. And there's an ocean of milk there, and he's lying there again on Sheshanag, and expanding in the hearts of all and in every atom. So in this way, Krishna, through his expansions, is present everywhere. Vishnu is omnipresent. And we learned in the previous chapter what that super soul is. Upadrashta Anumantacha. He's an overseer and the permitter. 15th chapter, the giver of remembrance, knowledge, forgetfulness, always with us. You see? And when we become interested in transcendental matters, then he starts guiding us in the right direction. We can't directly perceive him, so he appears externally as Shastra and the Guru and the sadhus like that. So this is what's going on, but no one knows this. When you're in the modes of nature, you're just dealing with the material varieties. Now this idea of varieties is brought up here. The variegatedness, remember that? Is that the spiritual world is full of variegated varieties. The material world is full of variegatedness, varieties. This world is a reflection of that world. Nothing can exist here that doesn't exist there, but it's become, the reflection has become perverted, distorted. In fact, Prabhupada made it clear, what's the highest there is the lowest here. You know, the so-called adulterous affairs, you know, of Krishna and the gopis. A lot of people don't understand, how can you worship a God who's so immoral and all this? They don't understand. It's the highest levels of devotional service are there and reflected here in abominable, illicit activities. So, Krishna is describing, he is the source. I impregnate that material energy, and it's just analogous to the way in which reproduction goes on here. There's a seed, there's a womb. Womb is the material energy, is the womb for all the living entities who are like the seeds, and they come in, and then we develop, and we start taking on our karma and doing our activities that was stopped in the previous creation. This is how the creation takes place. So, it's very important knowledge. Okay. Any questions? Local, remote? Okay. Yes. You have to speak up. You're in the corner. They can't see you. We have a mic here.
Thank you, Dravida Prabhu. I had a couple of questions. My first question, you didn't explain the second part. You said there's Brahman and then Brahma. So
the difference between Brahma and Brahma. What is Brahma?
Yeah.
Well, Brahma is that. Watch out. You know, the importance of the long A's. We drop in those long A's and we get Shastra instead of Shastra. Some of you have you heard my joke about Vanchakalpatarubhishya? Some of you heard that before. No? Okay. This is an easy way to remember. Watch out for those long and short A's. So first of all, the Shastra. Shastra is scripture. Shastra is weapon. So how does what's the relationship? It comes from the root shas, to be controlled. We're supposed to voluntarily come under the control of Shastra and Guru. So shishya, a disciple is a shishya, the same root. You agree to be controlled by the words of the Guru, and you start follow the Shastra. Otherwise, the Durga will get you with her weapons, threefold miseries. The trident, you know. Okay, so now we say every day, right? Pancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhu behavicha, etc. But oftentimes, this is what happens. The long become short. Very rarely do the short become long. So instead of vancha kalpatarubhyascha, I hear a lot of vancha kalpatarubhyascha, vancha kalpatarubhyascha. All right, you know, we know what it means. But what does it really mean to someone who knows Sanskrit? So vancha means desires. I mean, this is by way of just answering, yes, Brahma. You watch for that long A at the end, then you know it's Brahma, the person. That's the idea. But the word vancha means desires, and kalpataru means a desire tree. So they're a little redundant, but that's the idea, is that the devotees are desire trees. They can fill your spiritual desires like that. But vancha, vanchaka, means to cheat. And alpa means small. So when you have vanchakalpatarubhyascha, you have small cheating trees. I offer my obeisance unto all the assembled devotees who are like small cheating trees. So just be careful. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha. Okay. So where were we? Oh, you having a question? Okay, Mike. Is it on? Yeah.
So, this extraordinary stem that is coming from Garbhodakshaya Vishnu,
Navel.
the planetary systems are within that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the 14 planets.
And then the coverings of the universe are outside of the stem.
Yes, and the I'm not, you know, I have to do the research whether they stay in there or not. I know that may be the seed form of the planets, because it's hard to visualize how the planet, you know, the things are going on if it's all in the stem. But that's and the karma is in there. All the accumulated karma, the living entities in there. It's an important stem. And Brahma comes, you know, he appears on there. He doesn't know where he came from. What's this? It's all dark, you know. So he says, "What can I do?" And then he hears, you know, sometimes Prabhupada says in the heart, but he hears, "Tapa, tapa, tapa," 3 times. And he says, he's smart, he's really intelligent. He says, "Okay, I get it. I got to practice austerity," means meditation. So he starts meditating, and eventually Krishna enlightens him completely from within the heart. You know, he's initiating the Gayatri mantras through the flute song and everything, you know. And he sings the Brahma Samhita, which is really it's mentioned in the Brahma Samhita as kind of a summary of the Bhagavatam philosophy. Right there. Govindamadi Purusham. Really important. Okay, now here's the verse that I was thinking about, that really probably would quote all the time. Savayo nishikaunteya murtiyak sambhavanti yaha tasam brahma mahadjonir aham bija pradakpita. It should be understood that all species of life, O son of Kunti, are made possible by birth in this material nature, and that I am the seed-giving Father. Purport. In this verse, it is clearly explained that the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, is the original Father of all living entities. The living entities are combinations of the material nature and the spiritual nature. Such living entities are seen not only on this planet, but on every planet, even on the highest, where Brahma is situated. Everywhere there are living entities. Within the earth there are living entities, even within water and within fire. All these appearances are due to the mother, material nature, and Krishna's seed-giving process. The purport is that the material world is impregnated with living entities who come out in various forms at the time of creation according to their past deeds. So that karma is very important. So this is one of the things that I remember reading this, you know, verse for the first time, is to realize our kinship with every living entity. We just happen to be, by evolution, not of the body, but of consciousness, in a human form. But we have kinship with every living being. So you know, a sane government is meant to protect all living entities in the government, in the nation, the citizens, right? And that includes the animals. There's absolutely no need for human beings to eat animals. It's simply a manifestation of the mode of ignorance, passion and ignorance. And you can see how covered you have to be in order to blithely do that. I mean, I remember when I was a kid growing up, I didn't think twice. I had no idea. It was interesting because, forgive me if I bring it up, but, steaks and hamburgers, they don't look like animals, But I remember I used to sit at the table. I remember this distinctly. I didn't want to have any chicken because you could see the chicken, they would carve up and the wings, and all this. And I thought, well, there was obviously a chicken there, So I had to be acclimated to that so then I could happily, fall into that mode and be just like everyone else. So, but if you're raised and you understand this philosophy, you're saying every living entity is our brother, sister. We're all children of God. I remember there used to be one of these bogus yogis groups, children of God. Well, that's okay, but you have to understand how to realize that. So, this if we understand this verse, then we immediately understand the kinship with every living being. And we don't do harm unnecessarily, and try our best not to do harm to any living being. That's the way we actually see it. And when we see all these poor human beings who have no idea of this knowledge, we feel, oh, there's a need to help them. Because what the material energy is, really, is a big prison house. Now, we're hearing about the creation and all of these different things. This is not this is all extraneous. In other words, ideally, there wouldn't be a material world. Ideally, there wouldn't be any prisons. But because there's some, citizens are going to violate the law and be disturbances, you need prisons. I'm not talking about our crazy prison system here, just to, you know what I'm talking about. But there's always going to be outlaws and always have to be prisons. So we're the outlaws. We're the ones who are rebelled against Krishna and caused a disturbance to all the other devotees. That's why we can't stay. So Krishna makes a vast arrangement, all of this Mahavishnu and the expansion and all of the things just so that we can have a place to try to fulfill our material desires and hopefully learn our lessons, our lessons, that we shouldn't do this and we should follow the process by which we can get back home, back to Godhead. Very important to understand that that's our natural state. And that this is just a false world. I always like to bring up this verse that appears in the Bhagavatam 5 times, one with a slight variation. We just had one of those variations in end of the 4th canto we were reading. It came up in one chapter twice. Arteya vidyamane pi sangskriti nanabhata de dhyayato vishayan asya swapne nartagamoyata. That in truth, arte avidyamane pi, that this material world is unreal in the sense that is not what we think it is. In other words, it's real but temporary, but we're taking it to be a place of happiness and security and so forth. So like it's a big dream. We're living a dream. That word comes up here. But that samsriti, samsara, which means suffering, birth, old age, disease, and death, does not cease for one who is meditating on this material energy as objects of sense gratification. The same phrase appears in the Gita, dhyayato vishayan pungsa sangateshu bhajayati, in the 2nd chapter. So that absorption of the mind in the varieties of this world for pleasure, that's what's keeping us here. We're pleasure-seeking beings. We're just like Krishna in that regard. We have his qualities in minute quantity. And one of his qualities is to be anandamayo vyasat, full of bliss. What happened? We're not full of bliss all the time. Instead of being Satchidananda, eternal, full of knowledge, full of bliss, we're Asat, Achit, and Nirananda. We're certainly not permanent. Does anyone want to be permanent in his body? I mean, I don't want to be permanent. But we're not permanent. We're not eternal. Are we always full of bliss? No. No one can say that. And there's so many things we don't know. So we've lost our original quality. because of that turning away from Krishna and forgetting that relationship. And so this is a place of it's a prison house, but it's also a reformatory. So we're suffering here, but when we find out why and how to mitigate it for real, and we take the proper steps to do that, then Krishna will welcome us back home. And the basic step, surrender to me. And to do that, surrender to my representative, my sincere representative. That's the most confidential knowledge here. So all of this knowledge that we're learning, what our situation is, how the creation occurred, how the material energy works with the modes of nature, that's why Krishna says it's so important. And the end, Arjuna asks, well, how does one transcend this material energy? Oh, okay. Mam chiyova bicharinam bhakti yogena sevate. This is a key verse, very often quoted. By unflinching, unfailing devotional service unto me, one transcends the modes of nature and comes to the level of pure spirit. Brahma bhuyaya kalpate. Is where we want to live. So that's coming at the end of the chapter. All right. So Krishna is the father of all. Aham bija pradak pita. If you can't memorize the whole verse, just that one phrase. Aham bija pradak pita. I am bija, the seed-giving prada, father of everybody. That makes us all brothers, sisters. Hare Krishna. That's very encouraging. We should be very friendly to each other. All right, now he's going to start about explaining the three modes of nature. Sattvam rajas tamaiti guna prakriti sambhavaha nibadnanti mahabaho dehe dehinam abhyayam. Material nature consists of three modes: goodness, passion, and ignorance. When the eternal living entity comes in contact with nature, Almighty Amdarjun, he becomes conditioned by these modes. Purport. The living entity, because he is transcendental, has nothing to do with this material nature. Still, because he has become conditioned by the material world, he is acting under the spell of the three modes of material nature. Because living entities have different kinds of bodies in terms of the different aspects of nature, they are induced to act according to that nature. This is the cause of the varieties of happiness and distress. So this word is so important. Spell. Under the spell. Meaning that due to the influence of the material energy, everything we perceive as backwards, is upside down. And Akrura has a prayer like that. Anityanatma dukkeshu viparhi amatiriyaham dvandvaramastama vishnu najane tvatmanak priyam. He's praying to Krishna in the Yamuna River. You know, when he goes to pick up Krishna and Balaram to bring him back to Mathura, so that they'll have the wrestling match and ultimately kill Kamsa. So along the way, they stop at the Yamuna, and Krishna and Balaram go and take a bath, and they come back and sit on the chariot. And then Akrura, he goes into the water, comes out, and then goes in, and then he sees Krishna as Narayan sitting, relaxing on Sheshanag again, who's Balaram. And then he starts offering his prayers. And one of those prayers where he appeals to them is that this is my situation. This is part of what's called Dainya Bodhaka, where you approach the Lord and you confess, I'm so unqualified, this is my situation, please bless me, that type of thing. So this is one of the verses. The aham, what does it say? Anityanatma dukkeshu. So I am thinking, this is my situation, I'm thinking that those things which are permanent are eternal. Those things which are not me are me, maybe in the body. And those things which are sources of misery, I'm taking to be sources of happiness. Very important. And in this way, everything is reversed. My whole conception of life is reversed. Vipari materiam. And in this situation, dvandva ramo, I am trying to enjoy the dualities of this world. And in this way, tamo vishto, entering more and more into darkness of ignorance. And the greatest tragedy, najane tvatmanak priyam, I have no idea, I've completely forgotten you, my Lord, that you are my dearmost master and friend and protector. This is a very, telling verse. He's talking about us. And then he says, Yatabudo jalam hitva parichannam tudadbabai. I forget the third line, the Sanskrit. It says, I'm just like a foolish animal. Imagine you're in a desert. We probably won't have to imagine that much longer because things are drying up here, the whole west. We are in a desert, it's artificially water. Anyway, so you're in a real desert, And there's an oasis there. And you're standing on the edge of that oasis, and you're very thirsty. Right at your feet is a nice pool of water, but it's been overgrown with various vegetation, and you can't see it. You look out into the desert, and there's a nice lake. Seems to be. It's actually a mirage. But you don't know that, so you run out there, and you get there, there's no water. So he's saying like that, I'm just like a foolish animal who runs after the mirage in the desert and dies. And so all of this so-called happiness and peace and things to aspire for, they're just like these mirages in the desert. They're not substantial because our life in this very body isn't substantial. Well, how can there be any permanent happiness when the very foundation of it, which is this body, is dying at every moment? You see how it's just like a fool's gold, like this idea of mirage, you know. So his solution, Akrura's solution, is to surrender unto the lotus feet of Krishna, which comes up in a couple of verses. But that's exactly what material energy is. And how does it bind us with these modes of nature? Now, when you're under the spell of, say, the mode of passion and ignorance, you're absolutely, sure of what you concluded about the senses and your place here, and you're willing to defend it, with various arguments. But it's a complete concoction. It doesn't mean anything ultimately, because all of your ideas and all of your surety is just destroyed by time and ultimately annihilated by death, and then you take another body. There's nothing permanent in this world, and that's why it's called asat, which means ultimately not true. So Krishna consciousness is this waking up idea. Uttishta jagrata prapivarana bodhata. Get up, wake up, understand the great value of the human form of life, pursue this absolute truth. Atata Brahma Jigyasa. And now then, having come to the human form of life, inquire into the absolute truth. This word Brahman again. What is that Brahman? Janmadyasya yataha. Exactly what's being talked about here. The source of everything, and the maintainer of everything, and ultimately the destroyer of everything. That's Brahman. Existed before there was any material creation, as Krishna says in the Srimad Bhagavatam, 2nd canto. So this is all very important things, so that we can our faith and our practice should be founded on firm knowledge of what Krishna is saying here in the Bhagavad Gita. And Prabhupada is presenting it so nicely with his purports. Okay. So here, we have a time for at least starting on the discussion of the different modes, what their qualities are. 6. Tatta sattvam nirmalat bhat pakashakamanāmayam Sukha sangena budnati Jnana sangena chanaka. Krishna says to Arjuna, O sinless one, the mode of goodness, being purer than the others, is illuminating, and it frees one from all sinful reactions. Those situated in that mode become conditioned by a sense of happiness and knowledge. Purport. The living entities conditioned by material nature are of various types. One is happy, another is very active, and another is helpless. All these types of psychological manifestations are causes of the entity's conditioned states in nature, status in nature. How they are differently conditioned is explained in this section of the Bhagavad Gita. The mode of goodness is first considered. The effect of developing the mode of goodness in the material world is that one becomes wiser than those otherwise conditioned. A man in the mode of goodness is not so much affected by material miseries, and he has a sense of advancement in material knowledge. The representative type is the Brahman, who is supposed to be situated in the mode of goodness. This sense of happiness is due to understanding that in the mode of goodness one is more or less free from sinful reactions. Actually, in the Vedic literature, it is said that the mode of goodness means greater knowledge and a greater sense of happiness. The difficulty here is that when a living entity is situated in the mode of goodness, he becomes conditioned to feel that he is advanced in knowledge and is better than others. In this way, he becomes conditioned. The best examples are the scientist and the philosopher. Each is very proud of his knowledge, and because they generally improve their living conditions, they feel a sort of material happiness. This sense of advanced happiness in conditioned life makes them bound by the mode of goodness of material nature. As such, they are attracted toward working in the mode of goodness, and as long as they have an attraction for working in that way, they have to take some type of body in the modes of nature. Thus, there is no likelihood of liberation or of being transferred to the spiritual world. Repeatedly, one may become a philosopher, a scientist, or a poet, and repeatedly become entangled in the same disadvantages of birth and death. But, due to the illusion of the material energy, one thinks that that sort of life is pleasant. So what I like to say, the mode of goodness is not good enough. Just to be in the mode of goodness is not the solution to the problem. And then we learn quickly, after a couple of verses, that there's never any pure modes. You know, someone is in the mode of goodness, but sometimes he falls into the mode of passion and even the mode of ignorance. There's different combinations. And we can experience in our own life. Sometimes we really get excited about working and doing something, and then we just kind of burn out. You know, we want to chill out for a while, just lay around, spend the whole weekend sleeping, you know, and watching TV. And Monday comes, all right, let's go. So you got the mode of goodness, the mode of passion, and the mode of ignorance, you know. And sometimes you reflect, all right, let me go out in the country and think, you know, we take stock of things and just, you know, sit under a tree. And a little mode of goodness there, you know. So that's the problem. And as Prabhupada points out here, and as Krishna points out, there's a certain sense of happiness, and you naturally become proud. So, you know, I've got my PhD, and when I go to hear music, I don't hear this, you know, really low-class music. I go to the Philharmonic and listen to it's Maya. It may be a fine Maya, but it doesn't protect you from birth and death. And in this age, things are so crazy and contaminated, you can easily be dragged off into the lower modes. So we need a process by which we can elevate ourselves and become firmly fixed in the mode of goodness and the mode of pure goodness, so that we are at the nishta stage, and that means you know, there's no question of deviating anymore. You're firmly convinced that Krishna is Supreme Personality of Godhead.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Do you have a minute to ask? Can I ask questions?
Okay, real quick, because we're running out of time.
Okay. So mode of good, as you mentioned, there are three in the book. Three, we have Sattva Gun, Rajo Gun, Tamo Gun. And my question is, we all, I mean, I experience sometime, like you said, Tamo Gun, sometime Rajo Gun. So we constantly, even though we experience these three modes of nature, but why is it still, I mean, it can never stay in Sattva Gun all the time, or, you know, so is that good, still okay? I mean, I know it's not good, I mean, Tamo Gun and Rajo Gun, but we can't help it. How do we come up?
Well, the thing is that if we determine to become Krishna conscious, and we become serious in our sadhana and our chanting, then gradually it's described in the first canto, second chapter, text 17 to 21, how hearing and chanting, especially purify, Krishna from within the heart purifies, and you become fixed. Tada radastamo bhava kamalo debe yesterday, exactly pertinent. That when you become naishtaki, which is this nishta I was talking about, then you're no longer affected by the lower modes of nature. You become firmly fixed in sattva gun. In other words, yes, we sometimes fall out of that into the modes, but the idea is to come to the point where we don't fall into the modes. It's only possible by holding on to Krishna's lotus feet, by increasing our remembrance of Krishna and our service to Krishna. Wherever there's the sun of Krishna, the darkness of Maya can't have any sway. That's the, you know, what does it say? Krishna is like the sun, Maya is like the darkness. Wherever there is Krishna, there can't be the darkness of Maya. So the answer is, yes, it's true but we're conscious of it at least. We know that we want to try to come out of these lower modes and become Krishna conscious. But actual Krishna conscious means that you don't fall into the mode. Even if you're taking rest, ideally you're resting because you need to do service to Krishna and you're dreaming of Krishna. Then even though it looks like you're in the modes, you're not in the modes. You're in Krishna consciousness. Prabhupada says 24 hours a day. Something to work for it. Okay, it's getting a little late. We have one more day. We'll end this week of class, and we'll proceed with text 7 tomorrow, which is a Kaddish.
Thank you so much, Prabhu.
Hari Bol,
Hare
Dhanamai.
Krishna. Very nice. Thank you.
All glories to Srila Prabhupada.